I think the court ruled properly. I think the Internet has been a huge success. I think our general broadband policy that we put in place in the 1996 Telecommunications Act has been a big success. I don't want an activist FCC that's stepping in and dictating investment decisions and also setting terms and conditions for pricing and access to the Internet. Mr. Markey and Senator Kerry appear to want that. I don't. And I don't think the American people do, and I don't think the majority of the users of the Internet do if you explain the issue to them. What confuses the issue is the term that is used, net neutrality, is something that if you ask people if you're for net neutrality, everybody would answer yes. But as it's implemented, net neutrality by Mr. Markey and Senator Kerry is not it's not neutral. It's just the opposite. It's a government regulation of the Internet.
Joe Barton is the ranking member of the Energy and Commerce Committee in the House of Representatives. Congressman, thank you for joining us on the Communicators.
It's my pleasure.
Well, one of the consumer groups that is very active in the debate on net neutrality is called Free Press. We also talked with Marvin Amori, who is the general counsel for that group, and in fact, he argued on behalf of the group in front of the three-judge panel.
Mr. Amori, when you were arguing for free press in front of the three-judge panel, what was your strategy?
Well, by the time I argued, the FCC had already argued, and it was pretty clear by that point that we were going to lose. And so the question was, how broad or how narrow would the ruling be? And so the strategy was just to encourage the judges to have very clear guidance to the public and the FCC, which is exactly what the court did. And the court was very clear in the ruling that the FCC would probably have to scrap its current regulatory framework in order to protect consumers on the Internet. When you said you knew you were going to lose, could you give some brief indications of how you got that vibe? Well, at that point, the Comcast and their intervener, the people on their side, had argued and gotten a few softballs. And when the FCC had argued, the D.C. Circuit was incredibly aggressive, didn't seem to buy any of the arguments. The D.C. Circuit, when I knew we were going to be in the D.C. Circuit, I had a pretty good idea we were going to lose. It's a very deregulatory, ideological court. And the last question that was asked of the FCC was, if you're going to lose, how do you want us to rule against you? Something narrow or on jurisdiction? And so when the court asks you, how do you want to lose, that's a pretty bad sign. When you wrote about this on your blog, one of the sentences you used were, we were given the guidance we wanted, but not the answer we didn't. Could you expand on that? Well, we wanted to make sure that the court made it very clear what the FCC would have to do to protect consumers. Right? The FCC believes they have a mission to keep the Internet open and free to all Americans, to ensure innovation and democratic speech is still available on the Internet, and that carriers can't just block speech and block new innovative technologies. And so the FCC really needs guidance. What should they do? And we were hoping that the FCC could continue on their current regulatory framework, which is a flawed framework. But as it turns out, they can't. They have to go back to the drawing board and actually adopt what I think would be the more accurate and correct statutory framework to regulate broadband. And is that the Title II that we hear about? That's Title II. So the analogy I try to use is, if you remember, people were talking about the financial collapse and deregulation. People talk about CDOs, these shady instruments that are kind of like insurance, but not regulated like insurance. I mean, what the FCC did in the Bush administration was something similar. They classified a network technology, which is clearly a network, as though access to the Internet, as though it were Twitter or some unregulated technology. So what they have to do is essentially call insurance, call a network Title II, not Title I. Right? Internet access is not Twitter; it's more like the phone network. So, if say per se the FCC wanted to adopt Title II, is it as simple as the commissioners meet, they just debate about this, and there's a vote? It's that simple. You just need 3 votes from the commission. And I mean, in fact, it's clearly, in my opinion, the obvious way of reading the statute. Justice Scalia, in a dissent with 3 other Supreme Court justices, thought it was the obvious way of reading the statute. And several years ago, when Commissioner Copps, who's a Democratic commissioner and a hero on net neutrality, dissented from the original order changing the statutory framework from Title I to Title II, he described this as a gigantic leap away from Congress's statutory framework into the FCC's no man's land. So I think it'll be an easy thing to change if the FCC can withstand the political pressure. It's not a legal question so much as a political question, and the carriers are very, very powerful. They give a lot of money to congressmen. They have a lot of influence in Washington, and it's really a question of will the public stand up and stand with the FCC in doing the right thing, or will the carriers have their way?
So specifically on the political front, do you think Chairman Janikowski has the will to do that?
I think Chairman Janikowski is a great, smart guy. I do think that any person who wants to act, any regulator who wants to act in favor of the public really needs the public standing loud and strong with him. I mean, it takes a lot of will to stand up to these powerful, powerful carriers, a lot of DC influence. And if the public stands with him and says, we stand for an open internet. We believe that we should have access to any site on the internet. The internet in the U.S. should be freer than it is in China, even if it's delivered to us by private companies. Right? If the public stands with Julius Janikowski, I think that makes it a lot easier for him and the other two commissioners whose votes will be needed to do the right thing.
As far as responses to this, one of those responding was the former FCC chairman, Michael Powell, and he said specifically when he was talking about Title II, he said that if the FCC wanted to establish itself as the Internet overseer, it would continue to have serious jurisdictional problems. How would you respond to that?
Michael Powell is wrong, and he's the one who got us into this mess. It was his decision when he was chairman to start deregulating and to reclassify things that have really harmed our internet infrastructure. And he's absolutely wrong. If the FCC reclassifies, what they do is they then have the authority to regulate internet access, which is the access provided by cable and phone companies, and they will never have the authority to regulate things on the internet, like you sharing photos on Facebook or Twitter. What Michael Powell did was confuse that distinction.
You talked about the Title II aspect, but when you posted on your blog, you were somewhat hopeful on some areas. Could I ask what you think about what this decision and what it means for elements of the National Broadband Plan?
Well, that's where I'm slightly less hopeful, actually. So this decision goes far beyond network neutrality. So network neutrality is the concept that people should be able to go wherever they want on the internet, create any technology, and not need permission from their phone or cable company. And there's a huge right-left coalition called SaveTheInternet.com organizing around net neutrality. But beyond that question of net neutrality, this jurisdictional ruling by the D.C. Circuit implicates a whole range of things that the FCC could do in their national broadband plan. And the General Counsel of the FCC posted a blog about it. It includes things like ensuring access to all Americans in rural areas and in underserved areas, making sure that we have cybersecurity, consumer protection, privacy. There's a whole range of things that are implicated by this court decision that really, I think, necessitate the FCC to go back to the drawing board, reverse the terrible policies adopted by Michael Powell and that commission, and put the FCC on firm regulatory footing for the major communications infrastructure of our time, the Internet.
Chairman Waxman had said that he would work with other Democrats on the House Energy and Commerce Commission on possibly finding ways to give the commission more legal authority. What could they do from a congressional standpoint?
Well, I mean, Congress could pass a statute that would clarify this issue. I'm a little skeptical that Congress can move quickly enough. And in the meantime, the FCC should just act to get back within the regulatory statutory framework that exists. And over the next 2 years, Congress can debate the issue. And there'll be a full-out press by the phone and cable companies who have tons of influence in Congress to try to hijack the process. In the meantime, the FCC has to do things to make sure that our broadband infrastructure, which has fallen far behind from the world leaders in terms of speeds, prices, openness, that our country doesn't fall behind in this critical infrastructure and hurt our economy in the next few years.
Our guest serves as a law professor for his job, also the general counsel for Free Press. You can find more about their decision, their response to it, freepress.net. Marvin Amori, thanks for your time this morning.